So hi everyone, this is a recording on the topic of how to write a working paper / draft resolution for GA style or specialized committee. So what I'm going to do first is take you through this document that has information on how to write a working paper and also an example of a working paper that you can see here. This document is available on the WAMUC website, so you can go there and go to the section on how to prepare, and you'll find these documents. I'll also post links to the documents on Schoology, but I figured it would be a good idea to also walk through them with you guys just so you have a chance to have somebody talk to you about some specifics maybe when it comes to these things. So first of all, let's discuss what a resolution is and what its purpose is. So the UN as a body does not pass laws, so it doesn't really pass international laws. Instead, it passes resolutions. So that's a very important thing to note, because a resolution cannot force a particular state to take some action. It cannot put sanctions on a particular state and say, okay, you guys can't, we want to make sure this country does not do this, so therefore we're going to withhold, aid funds from them. It can only really make recommendations. So that's a critical thing to note. So a resolution pressures member states to take a particular course of action. It can express an opinion on a pressing matter. So if the international community wants to condemn something, often that's how they'll do it, by writing a resolution. And then it also recommends to organizations like the UNSC, the Security Council, other institutional agencies that are able to actually draft international laws and things like that. It can make recommendations to them like, hey, UNSC, look into passing, sanctions against X country in order to resolve this issue, or whatever it might be. So that's another important fact there. You can also recommend there. So it's also important to note that a resolution is not a resolution until it is passed. So before you actually submit something as a resolution, it's called a working paper. So for most of the time in committee, you're going to be referring to these things as working papers. So once your working paper is submitted and the dais, basically the set of people running the committee up at the front, the chair and the co-chair and so forth, when they get that working paper, then it can be called a draft resolution. And then it's important that you make this working paper very effective in terms of it being clear, concise, and specific, because sometimes even more than its content, even, although I'm not going to say even more, but as much as its content, how it's written is what makes it appealing to people, both to your chair in terms of how they're going to evaluate you later on, and also to the other delegates in your committee who are going to be ultimately voting upon your resolution and deciding whether it passes. So you want to make the thing that you're putting forth as clear, concise, and specific as possible, and also make it good in terms of its content, which is what we'll get to a little bit later. Should be well researched. And then the other aspect here is the whole Model UN being in character thing, where it needs to reflect the interests of the sponsoring nations. So don't sign on to something that your country would normally not sign on to. That just really goes without saying. So know your country's positions on the issues you're going to be discussing, so that you can make sure you're staying with your country's policy. I mean, yes, concessions have to be made, and it happens, but the key thing about Model UN is definitely being in character, having that perspective of another country or another power. So that's important. So, So yeah, during the voting sessions for working papers, you have to be ready to be able to defend the document, particularly if you're one of the bigger powers involved in the formation of this resolution, or if you've played a bigger part, you're going to take a little bit more of the brunt of defending the document. So now let's get to the actual way of writing the document itself. So there are three parts to a working paper. There's the heading, there's the preambulatory clauses, So that basically, the preambulatory clauses really state the problem and why it's a problem, like why does that problem exist in the first place, what is the issue we are addressing, that's really the purpose of the preambulatory clauses, and then the operative clauses, which are discussing the action that needs to be taken. So basically, so yeah, so the resolution is really a giant sentence. There's only one period in the whole thing. That's a weird way of looking at it, so I'm not actually going to use that as a descriptor. We're going to really look at the actual format, and stuff will make a lot more sense. But it's basically made up of these preambulatory clauses and operative clauses, separated by commas and semicolons. And each clause must have an italicized initiating phrase. So this is the really key thing. So let's actually get to it, because it actually makes more sense once you see it. So the heading is pretty straightforward. The heading of a draft resolution or a working paper should have the committee, so the name of the organ. So like, for example, World Health Organization, SOCHM, whatever committee you're a part of, list the committee name. Should list the subject, so what the topic of the particular resolution is, whether the resolution is about quelling an epidemic, or the resolution is about introducing new genetic tests to certain countries, or like whatever it is about. You need to list the subject, you need to list the sponsors, so the list of sponsoring nations, and the list of signatories. So then once the working paper, so I'm going to actually, I need to check what the difference between sponsors and signatories is for GA. So I will put a little update with my Schoology post of this video that tells you that. It's slipping my mind at the moment, so I'm sorry about that. So when the working paper is adopted by the chair, it'll get a reference number, blah, 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 and then you can include that in the heading as well. So the DICE adds the reference number. So once you get your reference number, you can put it onto the paper. Okay? So then you have your preambulatory clauses. They show the problem that needs to be solved. So rather than like going through this, I'm just going to go to the direct thing here. So here's like here's, for example, a preambulatory clause. So this is the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and these are the sponsors, the signatories. So, for example, you have your preambulatory clauses. Keeping in mind the cost of developing a significant education program. Reiterating the enormous benefits provided to exporting and importing nations. Believing brain drain, blah, blah, blah. Emphasizing the role of open borders. Convinced that every nation has an interest in easy migration. So it's kind of dealing with we know that this is a problem. We know that we need to emphasize the role of open borders. We believe that this is the case, that brain drain is maybe useful in the long-run development for all nations. That brain drain isn't something to be combated against, like trying to dam up countries and prevent people from leaving. Instead, we should just let people go where the market takes them, and then everything will settle itself out in the long run. So these are all beliefs, ideas, problems that they're trying to address. And the key thing is to have those verbs, that whole keeping in mind, reiterating, believing, emphasizing. Those are your preambulatory clauses, or the phrases, sorry. The initiating phrases for your preambulatory clauses. So that's like the key formatting thing here. And you can see the header over here with the committee, the topic, education, the sponsors, and the signatories. So that's all listed out very clearly. Then you also have your operative clauses. Your operative clauses are going to talk about what you're going to do, or what the document does. The document deplores the creation of an education initiative to combat brain drain. It encourages countries to do this. It calls upon all nations to do this. So there's very much a sense of it doing things. Not necessarily like actually forcing countries to do things, but like the document is affirming certain things. It is, encouraging countries to do certain things. It's really, recommending that nations do this. So it's really providing a list of suggestions and recommendations for member nations to do based on the issue at hand. So once again, the key thing are those terms: deplores, encourages, calls upon, etc. And then they're numbered and formatted in terms of commas, semicolons, sub clauses, and main clauses in a specific way that is covered in more detail in this document, and that I feel would be boring and tedious to go through in more detail. All right. Sorry, guys, I'm walking and talking here, so you gotta give me a second. Okay. Okay. So requests, recommends, blah, blah, blah. So that's all pretty important right there. That you've got these initiating phrases for your operative clauses. So those are operative clauses. Then you have submitting and introducing a draft resolution. So submitting and introducing a draft resolution. In order to have your working paper introduced, you should submit the working paper. Hi, Mr. Brown. You should submit your working paper to the dais, which is located at the front of the room. After the draft resolutions, so once they've been distributed to everybody, so they print out copies and give them to everybody so they can look at them and read them, then you can go ahead and you know, the sponsors of the resolution can like get up and have a chance to introduce. Okay, so the sponsors are the ones who have written it. The signatories are people who support it. Okay, so that's naturally covered in here. So guys, it's in here now. So after the draft resolutions have been distributed, then the sponsors will come up, they'll introduce it, and they'll explain it to the entire committee. And then people can also introduce amendments. So there are friendly and unfriendly amendments. Friendly amendments are, you know, when the people who are actually the sponsors of the resolution decide to amend it in some way. If all the sponsors, you know, agree, then that's perfectly fine, and then they can change it. If another delegate besides the sponsors decides to write an amendment and everybody who sponsored it agrees with it, that's also a friendly amendment. But then if some other, if nations other than the sponsoring nations introduce some amendment to the resolution, then and they don't get the signatures of every one of the sponsors, then this is an unfriendly amendment. The one thing I would check is, I think that if you are a sponsor, if you submit an amendment, it's automatically friendly, but I don't know if you need to get the support of the others in your committee. So that's one thing. It's a bit of a gray area. Maybe look into that. And that's kind of an overall summary. Basically what you do is that you number your, so you have this formatting for the title header. You put the name of the committee, you put a comma, so it's like this is who you're addressing. You italicize the clauses, Mr. Biddle. You italicize the preambulatory clauses up here in the, or not the preambulatory, you italicize the initiating phrases of the preambulatory clauses. You number the other clauses, the operative clauses, you number them. You put a semicolon at the end of each operative clause, as you can see here. And when you have a subclauses under a particular clause, you put a comma, and then you put, you put a colon, and then you put commas at the end of each subclause. So you have a colon, and then you have commas. And then at the end of the entire document, when you're done with all of your clauses, then you put a period. So in that's what they mean by the one giant sentence thing. So anyway, I hope this overview was helpful. This is basically how to write a working paper or draft resolution, and this is basically the core of what you'll be